right here at the public library with author Bruce Mitchum, and he's going to tell us a little bit about his books and what inspired him to write them.
Boy, that's a goes way back in my history because I came from a family that had a couple of authors. I had an uncle who did a lot of writing, and a couple of cousins who we would uh, talk about different humorous possibilities for writing. And so then in high school, I had a high school English teacher who was very influential in my writing because she would require each student to write an essay each week, and then she would critique it and give it back to you and this sort of thing. Then when the Korean police action came along, I was trying to stay out of the Army, and that didn't work. And I ended up finding myself as editor of the base newspaper in Japan, where I was stationed. And so I kind of got started as a journalist more than anything else. And I should mention that earlier than that, in college, I was a sports editor of our college paper and the managing editor. Everything but the editor. Um, he always had more influence than I did, so I had these other roles. But you start with that discipline, and then to get into some of the books that I have here today that I wanted to mention, um, you have to go through some, or at least I went through some kind of a career situation where um, teaching in a college, they want you to publish, and the old slogan is publish or perish. And so everybody starts writing. And so in my university, which was Eastern Washington University up near Spokane, Washington, um, we had a very energetic Department of Education. And I started talking about different kind of writing opportunities with some of my colleagues. And so that's how a lot of this stuff began. Um, these two, for example, this first one is called Unequal Opportunity, A Crisis in America's Schools. And so my colleague and I, Robert Salisbury, we're interested in looking at the difference in performance in public schools and to see how much of it was related to the economic status of the students that were involved. And so that's how we got going on this one. And this one is particularly interesting to me because it's in the Oxnard Library here. This is the only one that I brought along that's actually in the library. Um, and unequal opportunity, a crisis in America's schools. And it's all about the socioeconomics of different groups of students, what they've experienced that goes into their education, what they haven't been able to experience. And it's also about those school tests that have become so prevalent now and why some kids score so high and others don't. And the research shows that it's not a matter of race per se, but it's all about economic opportunities. In other words, rich kids from Beverly Hills and places like that score extremely high, and kids from poverty parts of California and the rest of the United States don't do as well. It doesn't matter if it's public or private, although to be in a private school means that you're more likely to have students who are economically in a pretty substantial situation compared to some of the other kids. And then we got into multicultural education issues, the same author, and we got this idea that, well, people are throwing these terms around, and maybe it's time to write an encyclopedia of multicultural education. So this is all about um, things like, well, for example, on this page, it's all about fugitive slave laws and what those apply to, the American Civil Rights Movement, and terms and phrases like that. And then this one is kind of interesting because I'm a docent at the Channel Islands Maritime Museum. And so I got this idea several years ago that I would write a little book taking a look at California's very, very first maritimers, because we tend to focus pretty much on who sailed the big ships, people like Columbus and Magellan, and then right under our very nose, of course, the Chumash were paddling all over the place in their tamals. So I put this book together, and it's an interesting book because I refused to sell any of them because they made some horrible errors in the printing, and they wouldn't change them. So I'm not going to tell you what company that is, but anyhow, along the way, when you write enough, you always run across some crazy thing like that. And then this one was very special because my son is also interested in writing, and he lives out in Lancaster. And he had a college friend who went back up to Alaska to become a professional fisherman and skipper. And this is titled Lost in the Shelikof, which is up there, the Shelikof Strait. And it's about a shipwreck and a rescue. And so I knew he was doing this. He went up and interviewed people and did a lot of research. And then I noticed he wasn't talking about it for a while. And so I said, "Hey, you want me a little help with that?" Or and he said, "Would you?" And I said, "Yeah, let's go for it." And so we co-authored this book. Co-authored, although when it came out, I was only a with. I wasn't listed as a co-author. I was a with. So I've teased him about that a lot. And then finally, this one is called From Afghanistan to Zimbabwe. And it's all about uh, gifted education efforts in the world community. And one of my areas of research was in the whole field of education for really bright kids. And so we thought, well, let's find out what's going on in the world. So we did a big survey and got all our data that way, and ended up with this book. So these are some of the books that I've published. There are 7 or 8 more that I don't want to bore you with because they were textbooks that I used in my classes, and I don't teach anymore. So I'm happy and just having a lot of fun doing some more writing.
How can your work be viewed? Um,
Well, most of these, well, not most of these, but these 2 books, and actually this one too, are reference books. So they're not novels that are going to win Pulitzers or anything like that. they're just books that some people will be interested in and need for references for things they're working on, some of the things they're writing.
Do you have another project coming up?
Um, I have a finished manuscript that um, I'm trying to get into print now. It's called Gold and Greed, a multicultural history of the United States. And it's all about the gold discoveries in various parts of the country and how they affected various groups of people. Um, and of course, with the multicultural population that exists in California, that gets to be quite interesting because people came here for lots of different reasons, some of them against their will. And so anyhow, the gold discoveries had quite an effect on how a lot of that history took place.
Um, there's a lot of things that I see around Oxnard, and one thing I see is an art and writers. What made you come to Oxnard?
Well, that's an interesting question because my wife and I were trying to figure out how to celebrate Mother's Day one time when there were no kids around because they had all moved away after they graduated from college. And so we decided to come down to Southern California because we're tired of all the ice and snow that existed in eastern Washington. And so we got down here, and because of my interest in multicultural populations, decided to come to Oxnard because of the really neat environment and the different groups of people that populated this particular city. So that's how we ended up here. Also, we had a daughter in Ventura who had settled in Ventura. Um, so two of them were down here, the son in Lancaster and daughter in Ventura. And then the one holdout who is still living in Seattle.
Is she a writer? Does she write books too, or is just
No,
your son and yourself?
neither of the girls. It's just Jeff and I are the only two. He's not doing much writing right now. He's having too much trouble in a new teaching position that he's just gotten himself into. So he's not doing any writing that I know about.
Well, Bruce, what do you see? What do you see in the future for the kids or people to see you as? What would you like people to remember you?
Oh, I suppose for some of the things I've written and for some of the um, humorous stuff that I've done, I got into some poetry things where I was writing these crazy poems that are based on that poem, What a Wonderful Bird is the Pelican. His beak can hold more than his belly can. And so I use that meter for a few poems that I've been having a lot of fun with. So be remembered for the humor, I hope.
Thank you so much for your time and for giving us a lot about what we have here in beautiful Oxnard. And we leave you off, Darlene Miller.